بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We hope and we pray that everyone is doing well, inshallah ta'ala, tonight. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us His forgiveness and His mercy, us and our families, and enters us all into Jannah ya Rabbil Alameen. To proceed, tonight we are continuing with our program, which is the Traveler's Guide to Jannah, inshallah ta'ala. And as always, this is meant to be kind of a roadmap to get us all to our ultimate destination that we want to get to, inshaAllah ta'ala, which is, of course, the Jannah and Allah's forgiveness and Allah's pleasure, inshaAllah ta'ala. With that said, so for us today, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, the topic that we're talking about is getting ready for the acts of worship, which are really the mechanism of reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of that, we have to get the mechanism ready. We have to actually prepare. One of the things that we do to prepare is through what we call tahara, which is purification. So today we're going to talk about purification, but not from a fiqhi point of view, meaning not from a purely, this is how you make wudu, this is what's najis, this is what's tahara, this is how you the different states of tahara. We can do that inshallah ta'ala at another time. Right now we're focusing on maybe the elements that we tend to not focus on when we talk about these issues, which is what the purification is meant to do for the believer. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislate it? What are we supposed to have in mind when we think about it? What are the levels of purification, etc.? Because unfortunately we have two extremes in Islam, and we'll mention inshallah ta'ala these very briefly. One extreme focuses on the more practical fiqhi side at the expense of the more spiritual side of things, right? The spirit of the law versus the wording of the law, right? The letter of the law, like they say. And so they focus on the letter more. And then you have the opposite extreme, which focuses on the spirit of the law at the expense of the letter of the law until they're actually not practicing the law at all. Either of these extremes are bad. And in Islam, we have to achieve a balance between both, meaning applying the letter of the law as much as we can with it, the spirit of the law. We have to understand there's a wisdom behind everything that Allah legislates. And we have to understand that it's meant to make us better as individuals, as believers, as Muslims, inshaAllah ta'ala. So with that said, there are many levels of what we mean when we say the word tahara. There are many levels to purification. Level number one, and this is from, many scholars have actually talked about this, and so we're generalizing here, but we'll just say that there are four levels. A person could divide them into more if they want, or less if they want. That's not a problem. You'll see when we do the division that generally it makes sense, inshallah ta'ala. Level number one is تطهير الظاهر من الأحداث والأنجاس والأوساخ. So it is purifying the outside from anything that's najis, anything that's dirty, anything that doesn't belong, really. So this is that first level of tahara. And a lot of times when we do this, we just kind of do it and then we forget about it. Level number two, right, is تطهير الجوارح من الذنوب والآثام. It is purifying a person's limbs, extremities, from any sins and any mistakes. So this is where you purify your hands from not committing sins, your legs from committing sins, your eyes from committing sins, your ears from committing sins, your mouth, your tongue from committing, etc., etc., right? These things that we commit sins with, we make sure that we keep them clean by not committing sins. So that's another level. Another level above that is تطهير القلوب من الأخلاق السيئة. He says it is purifying one's heart from any character, any mannerisms that are unbefitting, purifying your heart from any ill feelings, from any ill intentions, etc. Okay, so this is where we're purifying our mannerisms, our etiquette, our behavior, and really behavior starts in the heart. If a person, like you say, hey, you have to behave well. Well, aslan, if they don't have a good heart, it's going to be very difficult for them to behave well. In fact, it's going to go against their nature. They cannot. turn it off. And this is why people with bad character, it immediately shows. And they'll always either be arrogant, or they'll be completely narcissistic, or they'll completely lie, they'll completely boast. They have no way of turning that off as well, because aslan it's emanating from their heart. Their heart itself is corrupt, so it corrupts everything else. When the heart is pure, then obviously it permeates throughout everything else. This is why character is so important. And so this is why also character is in a person's heart. So that's another level of purification, which is purifying our heart from ill character. طيب. Number 4, it is purifying. He says, تطهير السر عما سوى الله عز وجل. It is purifying one's secret, inside, their heart, their intentions, their mind, from anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is one of the highest levels. In fact, this is a level that arguably is somewhat unachievable, except by very few. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us to be, and to make it to eventually be among those few, inshaAllah ta'ala. What does this mean? It means I'm purifying my intention so much that my intention is purely for the sake of Allah in everything that I do, right? This is not just an act of worship, but it could be almost in everything that the individual does. The thing is, a lot of times we throw out the word purify your intentions and then let's go. So we start with that highest level and we throw it out there like it's something very easy to do, like it's something that's very easily accomplished, and then we go from there. Because we can set our intentions, we can say our intentions, but maintaining those intentions, maintaining that purification, and this is why we're talking about it in the chapter of purification, is so hard. You know, like if we have a house and the house is dirty, cleaning it once, it's very doable. It'll take a few hours. You can clean the whole house, maybe a day. Organize everything back. Keep it, nice and clean that day. But keeping a house clean for a month is a very different scenario, because that's constant upkeep, right? This is why we have to constantly keep on cleaning our homes, for example, cleaning our cars, cleaning our clothes. It's not a one-time deal. So if I think of purification as a one-time thing, then obviously I'm thinking about it incorrectly. What we do have to do is to make sure that the purification that we're doing is a constant thing. It's a constant practice. I'm never stopping cleaning. And what's funny is that we do have people who kind of complain about this. I always have to make wudu. I always have to clean my house. I always have to do the dishes. Well, yes, by design, those are going to be constant things that we have to constantly do, right? Because we're constantly using the dishes. We're constantly using our clothes. We're constantly using the house that we live in. Unless we don't use the house, then it's not going to become dirty. And even if we don't use the house, there's still, dust that's going to come up. There's still other things. So it still constantly needs cleaning. And this is why the idea of tahara, we should stop thinking about it as a one-time thing and think about it now, inshallah ta'ala, as something that we do on a regular basis. Tahara. It's a practice, right? It's a way of life. And this is why a believer who prays regularly, for them wudu is second nature. Why? And they don't even think about the wudu itself being necessarily a burden. Khalas, it's something that I have to do. It's not a problem. It's a way of life. They're constantly in a state of wudu. In fact, there are many scholars who would recommend a person to regularly be in a state of wudu. There's a hadith that indicate that consistently making wudu, meaning not like over and over and over again in the same setting, but rather every time you break your wudu, you just renew it again, is something that is good for the person to have, inshaAllah ta'ala. Okay? So these are the levels that we have. Unfortunately, we do have people, like I said, who go to an extreme. So they might focus on level 1 and that's it, in terms of purification. So their wudu, they're spending a lot of time, they'll make it. You have people who even go to extremes and due to a waswas, the whispers of shaitan, them doubting themselves, having OCD about it, they'll make the wudu and then they'll question themselves, wait, did I make my wudu 100%? No, let me go do it again. And they'll make the wudu again. And then they'll make it again. And then they'll make it again. And I remember the first time I saw this, it confused me. I didn't know what I was looking at. I talked to the brother. I made the mistake. I was like, brother, what are you doing? He's like, shh, You don't know what, I didn't make it right the first time and I have to make it again. And he makes it again. And you can see like he's really coming from a place where he's not thinking clearly. One of the ways to push this waswas, now this is not the only way, but this is one of the ways to push this waswas, and sometimes they call it waswas qahri, which is, it's compulsive, right? And that's why the OCD in that, right? They obsess over it, and it's compulsive. They have little control over it, that it pushes them to make their wudu multiple times. And one of the ways to overcome this is just make it once and don't look back. Meaning limit yourself. You say, I'm only going to make it once. That is it. I will not make it more than once. And so I'm going to make it count. I have no second chance. You can't give yourself that second chance. Just make it once and go on. And there's people that do this, of course, in salah, where they oh, did I make the takbirah? And one time I prayed next to a brother. He made the first takbiratul ihram. And then he's like, wait a second. And then he makes it again. And then he's like, wait a second. And then he makes it again. Like as if the first time that he made it, he wasn't sure if it was completely right. You don't have to make sure that it's completely right. If you raise your hand, you said Allahu Akbar, it's right. There is no like, well, did they reach a certain point? Did they do that? No. Don't think about it in purely technical terms. Because the Prophet ﷺ was never technical in this sense with us. And so therefore we shouldn't be technical either. Now, in things where the Prophet ﷺ was technical, things in the Quran is a little bit technical, then we should. But you'll see in most things the Prophet ﷺ was actually very lenient. He wasn't as technical as we think that he was. And therefore we shouldn't be that technical. And that's one of the things that we have to kind of realize by going back to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But you do have people that they become overly technical, so much so that they make the whole religion just technicalities. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, and the Prophet ﷺ tells us about people that came before us. And when they became strict, meaning they're too technical in the religion, they're too strict on themselves, Allah became strict on them. And when we overly technical, everything is just technical and there's no spirit of the thing going on, then it complicates our religion and we're no longer practicing the religion the way that it was meant to be practiced. And then we make it hard on ourselves and those around us, instead of actually doing it in that very merciful way that we were taught in our religion. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He grants us His mercy. So we have the people that have been too technical when it comes to practicing their religion, to the point where we have people making their wudu multiple times. Like we said, we have people that are focusing too much, for example, on istinja, cleaning themselves after using the restroom. I remember a brother came up and he said, it takes me maybe 5 minutes to clean myself after you. And I said, whoa, wait, what? 5 minutes? That's way too long. He said, yeah, I just want to make sure I get everything. I understand that mentality. You should. But this is why, and I think the wisdom is that the Prophet ﷺ limited it, for example, to like 3 or 4 or 7 times. 3 or 5 or 7 times. Witr, for example. And a lot of times people are surprised when they see how the Prophet ﷺ cleaned himself versus what we're kind of taught, or maybe the misconception is that we have today when it comes to purification specifically. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he was out in the desert, he would ask some of the Sahaba to bring him stones. And one time he said, bring me 3 stones. And this was after he defecated. So this is number 2 we're talking about. We're going to be like a little explicit there. 3 stones. And he used the 3 stones to wipe himself clean, and that's it. No water used, by the way. No water. This is a correct hadith, authentic. Every madhab, by the way, affirms this. This is not even a madhabi thing. Every madhab has this. And I've talked to people and they do affirm that it exists in their madhab. Every single one, because it's clear. And so many Sahaba have recorded it that we can't actually negate it. Tayyib. Fast forward now and you'll find people who, if they heard that, or if they were offered the opportunity to use stones, they'd be like, what are you talking about? No, it has to be water. Water's better. Water's great. In fact, in my statement, water's better, some scholars actually might push back and they said, what's your proof? To be honest, the proof is just kind of our own practice. It's not an actual proof. Some would say that, okay, maybe it's better to use both, meaning something solid to wipe and also finish off with water. And then nowadays, because we have toilet paper, you can start with water and then end and dry yourself with it. Regardless, we have ways of purification, but it shouldn't be too difficult to where it's cutting into everything else that you're doing as well. And the idea of purification here, this is meant to, our religion is meant to be easy, not made difficult. And so when that brother is sitting there for 5 minutes, and this is after number one, not number two, 5 minutes for number one. And I said, why? And he said, I just want to make sure I get every last drop of urine. And the thing is, like, even shuyukh like Ibn Taymiyyah, he says, after 3 times, because the hadith actually mentions 3 times, even for number one. After 3 times, you should get up and leave. It's enough. And some people complain, and he says, the private part is like a dur, meaning if you keep on squeezing, things are going to keep on coming out. At one point, you have to stop. And this is why the brother was there for 5 minutes. And I mentioned this to him, and he's like, yeah, you're right. I said, at some point, you have to leave. Like, what about the waswas? What about the whispers that come? Well, you have to figure out a way that you can push those whispers away. You have to figure out a way to push those whispers away. This is where many scholars later on, they would do cognitive behavioral therapy. The early ruminations of it within the Muslim empire, like Al-Balkhi and others, that pioneered this. And maybe one day we can talk about some of the research that's been done into their work and how it mimics really CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy that we have today. طيب. So he said, you have to figure out a way to kind of push those thoughts away through your actions and measures that you take. And this is why there's behavior that's involved, meaning you change your cognition based upon your behavior. Umar ibn Khattab, it is narrated that in order for him to, because he would clean himself, then he would leave. And then he said, so I want us to really think about this example. Umar, as an individual, is one of the best of the ummah. Arguably, number 2 in the ummah, perhaps. An amazing individual. And so if we ask ourselves, well, wait, did he have waswas? And some of us would be like, no, of course, Umar would never have waswas. The reality is, he himself talks about this and his struggle with waswas, which means that it's very normal and very human to have this struggle, by the way. What would he do to push it away? He said, كَانَ يَرْضَخُ مَلَابِسَهُ مِنَ الْمَاءِ. He would kind of spray his clothes with water so that if he got up after he had used the restroom, that if he felt any wetness, he wouldn't he wouldn't question himself. Because that's what happens to a lot of people. They finish from the restroom, and then they might feel something, but they're not sure. They're like, it's not positive or negative, and they're like, wait, did I just break my wudu? Did something happen? Do I have to go back and wash myself? Do I have to wash my clothes? What just happened right now? He doesn't. And the thing is, the Prophet ﷺ never taught us to doubt ourselves, to never really build our religion on doubt and to feed into the doubt. And so what Umar did is an amazing thing, I think, at least because it shows us the humanity of Umar radiallahu anhu, and it also shows us how he was willing to take steps to protect himself from the waswas. What did Umar radiallahu anhu do? Umar would take water and kind of radh, which is to kind of take water in your hand and kind of spray his clothes from the inside and sometimes even from the outside. His son narrates this, Abdullah ibn Umar. He says, I used to see his pants very wet after he'd used it. It looked, if you looked at it, you'd be like, what the heck, did he just pour water on himself almost? Now he wasn't. He was just kind of like, spraying them and whatnot, so that if he felt wetness, he would know, oh no, that's the water that I sprayed. That's not me, like maybe having an accident or something dripping or whatever, which would nullify the salah. And he just moves on from that point. You have to move on, because if you keep on feeding into these doubts, then you'll be a prisoner of those doubts forever. And Islam does not want us to be prisoners of doubts. It wants us to be set free by yaqeen. It wants us to be set free through certainty, through knowledge, through our practice and our behavior, through our actions. Because here's the thing. How do we know that it's waswas? Because shaitan's point is to stop you from doing good. And this actually stops people. Some people have come up to me like, Sheikh, I just don't know if I have it. And so he'll be like, I don't know if I can even pray right now. And they actually won't pray. And I said, why won't you pray? And he's like, well, I wasn't pure. And that's why I couldn't pray. And I'm like, bro, yeah, I understand your concern for purity, but you were pure. Go and pray. And so over concerning ourselves with purification led to us actually being more impure, spiritually speaking. And so this is how an overtly focus on physical cleanliness led to being unclean spiritually. And people don't realize the pitfall that they fall into because of this. physical cleanliness was meant to facilitate spiritual cleanliness. Meaning that when the person is making wudu, obviously the Prophet ﷺ, since he's telling us your sins are being washed away, I should try to think about that and embody that and be like, yeah, I should be asking Allah for forgiveness actually. Not just relying on the wudu, but when I go and pray, now I'm going to clean my... So like it's as if wudu is for the physical impurities, salah is for those spiritual impurities. But if I'm failing at my wudu, then I'm also going to fail at my spiritual. And like I said, sometimes we throw the spiritual out there and we kind of fail on both of these lines. If we look at the way that the Prophet ﷺ lived and behaved and his level of purification, it's completely different than what we think of. Like I ask my students all the time, is dirt dirty? And I know it sounds like an oxymoron because the word dirty comes from the word dirt. But is dirt unclean? And the answer is no, it's not. This is why the Prophet ﷺ كان يحتفي أحيانا. We have a hadith that he would sometimes walk barefoot outside. Just walk barefoot. Now if we said this nowadays, people would be like, what? How can you do this? Yeah. كان يصلي في نعله. In some hadith it mentions he used to pray with his shoes on. Some people might think like, but what if his shoes are unclean? خلاص. He's doing his best. He's not double checking them. But you can generally tell if you stepped in something or not. And maybe you don't know. This is why in that one hadith, there's one hadith that mentions that Jibreel alayhi salam came down to the Prophet and told him, your shoes are dirty. And at that point, he took them off, put them to his side. But this doesn't mean that he never after this prayed with his shoes on. He did. It just that in that moment, his shoes were dirty. And he needed somebody to tell him. But the Prophet never checked. We have a hadith of that mention, narrations like Ali ibn Abi Talib running into the masjid during the rain and praying while there's mud around with his shoes on. And we know this because some of the tabi'een were asked, is it okay to pray with our shoes on? And he said, I saw Ali ibn Abi Talib go into the masjid, pray with his shoes, not a problem. And in fact, he prayed in mud. And nowadays, none of us would even be willing to put our head on the ground, even though it's not even dirt, like it's just concrete, and we wouldn't even do that. We think that it's unclean. No, it's completely clean. The Prophet's masjid never actually had any carpet or rugs. Do you have to have a prayer rug to pray? No, you do not. You can pray anywhere. جُعِلَتْ لِي الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطَهُورًا. The whole entire earth has been made for me a masjid and a source of purification. Yes, there are exceptions to that. So that's a general rule. Exceptions to this are, there's a hadith that mention al-maqbara, a graveyard, al-mazbala, like a garbage dump, al-hammam, a bathroom. Places like this that we understand are unclean. A slaughterhouse, yes, unclean. Right? But after this, the earth's the limit, like they say. Instead of the sky's the limit, the earth's the limit, really. The whole earth you can pray anywhere. You can pray on grass, concrete, a parking lot. And some people, so I've had, unfortunately in our work as imams, we've had this, where people come up and they say, Sheikh, I didn't have a prayer rug and it was prayer time and I wanted to get out and pray, but it's the parking lot and this, and I'm not sure if it's clean, so I didn't pray. And out of a sense of cleanliness, he actually made things worse, especially spiritually. Missing one prayer is not an excuse. In fact, many scholars will say, if it's prayer time, this is a fatwa that exists, if it's prayer time, and the time is so short that you can't even make wudu, you can go and pray without wudu, just to catch the prayer. And there's a discussion whether the person needs to make wudu afterwards, because obviously they have to make wudu for the next prayer, but then should they make up the one as a sense of not making it up, but out of a sense of, overcorrecting it and whatnot. These are discussions that exist, right? So these are things that we kind of have to think about, in the sense that sometimes we overcomplicate our religion, and we think that we're being clean when in fact we're not. Another brother, he came up to me and he said, Sheikh, I went to a friend's house and the friend has a dog. Now the dog did not lick me or do anything, but I sat on the couch and I realized that the couch had a lot of dog hair. And when I left, I wanted to pray, but I realized I have dog hair on my clothes, and so I did not pray a single salah until I got home, and I ended up missing at least 2 salahs. Is that okay? But he said, I made them up, I did qada. This is a problem. Right? What's going on here? He's thinking that dog hair is impure. Is that the case? No, it is not. Dog hair is actually pure. It's not a problem. There's no nas that says anything about dog hair. meaning there's no text that says anything about dog hair. What it does say about saliva, and that's only when the saliva comes, إِذَا وَلَغَ الْكَلْبُ فِي إِنَاءِ أَحَدِكُمْ. You know, when the dog actually like drinks or eats out of one of your bowls and you want to use it yourself, then you have to do the following. Which means that even if a dog actually licks you, you don't have to wash your hands 7 times. Or if it like licks your clothes, you don't have to do that. It's only in the bowl. And one of them has to be with dirt, etc. And then even some scholars will say, okay, you know, what can take place of the dirt in this day is using soap. You could throw it in the washer and then the dryer and you'll be fine. What we're saying here is that people get stuck on false notions of purification that have no basis in the religion. And even if they do have a basis in religion, they still get stuck on them. And we can't. Purification is much more than this. Now, on the opposite side, the danger of what I'm saying is to go to another extreme where we say, you know what, the only thing that matters is spiritual purity. Therefore, if you know that your heart is clean, I'm not holding any grudges, I don't have any ill feelings toward anybody else, you know, God knows that I'm a good person, that's all that matters. I don't even have to make wudu. I don't have to worry about this whole, like, did I lose my wudu? Did I maybe not wash myself? All these things, you guys are worrying about it too much. And yeah, I can own a dog and all these other things in the house. And that's another extreme that we don't want to get to. We have to realize that there's a balance. We do have to make wudu. But we have to realize that we can go to extremes with making wudu as well. We can go to extremes cleaning ourselves in the restroom. However, on the opposite side is not cleaning yourself at all. That's also unacceptable. You have to clean. You know, it's better to pray in a place that's clean. Yes, everybody would agree. However, going to the extreme of not praying because you think that the place is not clean, this is incorrect. In fact, you can pray without wudu. If you cannot make wudu, you can pray. Let's say the place is complete. Let's say, la samahallah, you're for some reason stuck in a bathroom and you cannot get out, and it's prayer time, and the prayer time is going to leave unless you pray in the bathroom. What do? Do you not pray, or do you pray even though you're praying in the bathroom? Every sheikh, every scholar will tell you, no, even if it's in the bathroom and it's prayer time and you're going to miss it, you have to pray in the bathroom. People would hear this and be like, wow, astaghfirullah, how can you say this? The thing is, the salah catching it, which is why it's the spiritual cleanliness, is more important than the physical cleanliness. Now, a person might make the argument, okay, do I make sujood? Do I make this? That comes down to, like, sujood, like, are you praying sitting down, or are you praying standing up, or are you praying this? That's a different discussion that we can have technically for the fiqh side of things. But what I'm saying right now is that purification has its role. And sometimes we see things and we don't think that they're pure. In fact, they're very pure. So some practices of the Prophet ﷺ, right? He would walk sometimes barefoot. We said that sometimes he would clean himself with stones. Sometimes he would pray on the ground without any covering. Sometimes there would be a covering. So even if you don't have a prayer rug, you can pray. One time I saw a brother having a napkin, just a napkin for his forehead, and I said, wait, are you doing this because you're, Shia, for example? He said, no, I'm not Shia. So I said, okay, then what is it for? He said, this is a cleanliness. I said, also, you're standing on the same, and it's not a problem. Unless you're 100% sure there's najasa, don't do it. And he said, but brother, some people might leave the restroom and then walk by here. And I said, where's the restroom? He said, it's around the hallway, to the right, to the left. I mean, it's far. So what's the ruling then? How do you know that his shoes aren't clean by the time they come here? Because he's rubbing. Every time he walks, he's rubbing against the floor. He's taking many steps. How many steps? What? We're getting too technical now. Obviously, yes, don't pray in front of the door of the bathroom. Yes, aslan, because you can't pray in front of doors anyways. But even though the bathroom, yes, I wouldn't even pray in that general area. 100%, I agree with you. But down the hall to the right, you're about 50 steps, 100 steps away from the bathroom. You're completely fine. What are you doing? That's not a problem anymore. Because if you have that mentality, everybody walks in the bathroom, which means that everybody at some point inevitably will have najasa on them, even in a microscopic amount. And I think even a scientist would agree. In microscopic amounts, we all have najasa on us. Should we not pray then? No. So we have to realize that we should pray as long as we get enough off. What's the limit to this? By the way, in Madhab Imam Abu Hanifa, he specified it qadra dirham. which means 1 dirham, 1 coin's worth of najasa can be on you and your salah is still valid. Why did he say this? Because he wants people to realize it's not that big of a deal. Now, where is he getting this from? There's no hadith that mentions this, but he's saying this in order for us to realize that there's a limit sometimes to how clean you can actually be. And once you did enough, you did good, 3 times, 5 times, I wouldn't even clean more than 5 times. Just that, and then call it a day. That's it, we're done. Don't overcomplicate it. So, obviously, now, like what I'm saying is the Prophet did all these practices. However, some Muslims today would look at some of these prophetic practices and be like, what are you doing? You're praying on the ground with no cover? You're cleaning yourself with stones? You're making wudu just with little water? I mean, the thing is, there was a Bedouin. They showed a Bedouin guy, and he lives in the desert most of his time. And he had a cup of water, maybe as deep as this. Maybe a little deeper, maybe to the lid, like from here to here, water. And he made wudu, a complete wudu with that water, and he still had extra left. Wallahi, I was completely shocked. And I think if you go on YouTube, you can type in like Bedouin, I don't know the exact title, like the Bedouin making wudu. And it's an amazing thing. And you see this and you're like, wow. Nowadays, when we make wudu, it's like if it's not a shower, there's so much water being used. In addition to this, we have the misconception that a person has to make wudu 3 times, 3 times, 3 times. Now, that is the sunnah, but what we don't realize is that that's the complete sunnah. Because Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that sometimes the Prophet would only do every body part once. Meaning once for your hands, once for your mouth, once for your nose, once for your face. That's it, once. And sometimes sometimes twice, and sometimes 3 times. So now we sit back and we ask, okay, why? Scholars have made guesses. They said maybe he was already clean, and so you don't need to. So if you know that yourself, you're already clean for the most part, khalas. Some said, okay, sometimes it's to make sure that the water gets everywhere it's supposed to, so that you're not leaving a place dry, and this is correct. There are hadith that mentions, وَيْلُ الْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ, woe to the heels from the fire, because they used to wash their feet, but the heels would still be dry. Yes, you have to wash your feet. All of them, even up to your heels. So we have these ideas that, generally speaking though, the Prophet ﷺ is making wudu according to the situation. Which means that it's not as strict to be 3, 3, 3, 3 as we think that it is. And we shouldn't make it that difficult. And therefore, we do tend to waste a lot of water. You know what I mean? In order to be this thorough, but it would be better to be thorough with our spiritual cleanliness than just the physical one. If we were that thorough with our own hearts and our souls and our minds, wallahi, we'd be amazing people. But unfortunately, we're thorough with the things that are very easy, and we're not as thorough with the things that are hard. And we say like, oh yeah, purify your intentions. Yeah, my intentions are good. I have the best. Allah knows that I love Him. Allah. And we throw them out as if they're easy things to accomplish. Wallahi, they're not. Because if we truly think about what's deep inside, what's actually driving us, where our intentions are, we would be hard-pressed to fully say that yes, they're fully 100% for the sake of Allah. And myself, I'm guilty of this as well. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us and guide us, and to forgive us, and to help purify our intentions, inshallah ta'ala, and to purify our hearts. Tayyib. So, being economical with water is actually the sunnah. Nowadays, if you saw somebody making wudu out of a little cup like this, you'd look at them like, man, you barely made wudu. That's like, this isn't even not enough for my mouth, just when I do madmada. And thinking that we're doing right. And unfortunately, we have reached, I think, a point where we think that what we are doing is the sunnah when it's not. And a lot of people might be surprised at what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is the truth. Now, you can obviously make a shower, take a shower, you can use water, you can clean, you can scrub. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. But let's look at what the Prophet ﷺ did and what he encouraged and what we should do. Focusing purely on physical purification at the expense of your, spiritual cleanliness is incorrect. And then sacrificing, doing no physical purification and claiming that you have spiritual cleanliness is also incorrect. That's a liar. We have to have both because one leads to another. Our physical cleanliness should feed into our spiritual cleanliness, and we need both, right? And this is why removing dirt, removing things that are najis, removing impurities from ourselves is very important. It's the first step before doing something that beautifies us or actually makes us smell nice. So you don't put on perfume and then scrub all the dirt away, right? We agree with this. So this is what we call in Islam, um, purify and then beautify. Purify and then beautify. Clean and then build something nice, right? And this is, it's throughout our whole religion. In order to have good character, you need to remove the bad elements and then bring about good, right? When it comes to ourselves, cleanliness, we remove the najasa and then we cleanse ourselves, we make the wudu. We remove the state of impurity, the major, for example, janaba, the major state of impurity, and then we beautify ourselves and we cleanse ourselves, etc., etc. So you have to remove the najasa and then cleanse yourself. And so there are things that a person can do. All of these things are recommended. The Prophet ﷺ recommended a lot of things to keep ourselves clean. Regular wudu, regular showers. Think about this. The Prophet ﷺ is recommending regular showers. And in fact, our religion recommends it, generally speaking. 1400 years ago, at a time when a lot of people throughout the world just looked at a bath and a shower like, what? It's not that big of a deal. When Muslims were doing it, pioneering it. Washing your hands before and after. Eating. Washing your hands, doing the wudu, all these things, regular cleanliness. Using the toothstick, right, the miswak, the Prophet ﷺ recommended it. In fact, he said, لَوْلَا أَنَا أَشُقَّ عَلَى أُمَّتِي. If it weren't for the fact that I know that it would be a burden on my ummah, I would have commanded them to do the siwak before every salah. Meaning with every wudu that you're doing. So think about this. Whenever we can brush our teeth, we should. Cleaning our mouth, making sure our hair is clean, making sure. This is why soap was a Muslim invention. It was a Muslim man who invented soap. And in fact, when he was asked about his invention of soap, think about this. There was a point in time when soap didn't exist. This is true. To us, it sounds very weird. No soap. Yeah, they used different things, different materials to kind of clean themselves. But then when soap was realized, he discovered that there's things you can combine together that will remove oils from a person's body. And that's what soap actually does. It allows, the emulsifier and whatnot to combine with the oil so that you can actually wash it away, because oil and water don't mix, but with soap they do, and that's how the water is able to remove it. He invented it, and when he did, they asked him and he said clearly, without any doubt, it is because of my religion and what my religion encourages that I actually came up with this. And that's, to me, an amazing feat. Shampoo is a Muslim invention for hair, because it was different than soap. They would combine different things and whatnot. In fact, in the 1700s, a very famous story, the King of England was either visited by someone from the Ottoman Empire or the opposite. He went and visited the Ottoman. Somehow he came across what the Ottomans were doing. And at the time, the Ottoman Sultan had a guy who was a surgeon or a doctor of his shampoo, his cleanliness. I mean, a guy who's just in charge of actually helping him keep him clean. And he used this shampoo thingy. Right? Obviously, it's kind of different than our modern shampoo, but it does the same thing. It cleans. It removes the oils from the hair without damaging the hair, without damaging the scalp. And then they would use like a conditioner afterwards to kind of replace oils with something that's better. Same way that it works today. And so he used it, and the King of England was shocked because he saw the hair and how clean it was. Because think about it, if you're not able to remove the oil, it's very hard. So they would try to put oils and other balms and whatnot on their hair to kind of remove the things that were there before, etc. This is why it was recommended in the Sunnah to use oil on your hair to kind of push out the old oil and put in new oil, etc. It kind of works because the oils will mix together and kind of remove each other that way. But the better solution is to use the shampoo and then replace it with some good pure oil for that, to condition it. So the King of England, very famously in the 1700s, saw this, was so impressed, asked the Ottoman Empire, hey, can you send me somebody who knows how to do this? And so he sent him a Muslim guy, and he became hired by the King of England as his royal shampoo surgeon. And you can look this up. And he was in charge of keeping the King of England's hair clean with shampoo, because in the 1700s they didn't have the shampoo. The Muslims did. This is only, when you think about it, this is only 250 years ago. This is not that long ago. unfortunately, the stereotype that has been prevalent in the media is that, oh, these Muslims, these Arabs, they're unclean, they're dirty, they live in the desert, blah blah blah. We're the ones who are clean, we're the ones who actually do this. When up until 250 years ago, you could definitely argue that that was never the case. Europeans were always filthier than their Muslim counterparts, always. There's a good movie called The 13th Warrior, right? It's starring Antonio Banderas. It's one of the few movies, unfortunately, that actually have a protagonist who's Muslim, who's not vilified. He's actually the hero of the movie. He's a Muslim guy. He's played by Antonio Banderas, and it's actually a true story. It's based on a true story of an ambassador of the Abbasid Empire who himself was a poet, etc. And he goes and he lives with the Vikings for a while, and he sees how uncivilized and filthy the Vikings are, and how he himself was just kind of like put off by a lot of their practices because he himself was a very clean person. I mean, there's a scene in there where they're just like they're passing around a common bowl and they're all using it to clean themselves, but it's the same recycled water. I mean, they're cleaning their nose, they're blowing their nose in it and their mouth, and it's the same water, and they pass it to him to clean it, and he's like, no, I'm good, I need new water, guys. This is disgusting. So it shows you the civilized Muslim actually compared to, at that time, the uncivilized Europeans. Regardless, all of this is meant to tell us that, our ideas of cleanliness sometimes need to be revised in light of the Sunnah, and we have to realize what is cleanliness meant to actually accomplish. Purification has a goal. Now, in terms of us traveling to Jannah, right? This is the Traveler's Guide to Jannah. Purification is a mindset to keep in mind. It's not meant to hold us back from our journey. It's meant to actually propel us forward on our journey. And whenever the idea of purifying ourselves holds us back, then we know that it's probably not right. This is why we can't get stuck in these things. We have to realize, and we should never, physical purification should never come at the expense of, our spiritual, but that at the same time, spiritual cleanliness is dependent on the physical one as well. We have to have both. And we have to realize that a lot of these other levels of purification will come to, meaning purifying, ourselves from sins, purifying our hearts from bad manners. We'll come to these, because remember, purification is a mentality. It's an attitude. It's not a one-time thing. So we're going to come to this idea again and again. But this is the first step on the journey, is to clean ourselves before we embark, and to continue to clean ourselves while we are on this journey. We hope inshallah ta'ala was beneficial. If anybody has any questions or comments or concerns, let us know. You know how to reach out to us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He blesses you during this blessed evening, and that He forgives us all for our shortcomings and our mistakes and our sins. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He reunites us all in Jannah ya Rabbil Alameen, us and our parents and our forefathers. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.